All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Just give me a message in the comments and let me know that you can hear everything okay, everything sounds good, looks good, and then we'll jump in. So I know we're on a slight delay, so just give me a few seconds for your comments to populate there in the comment section, and then we'll be able to take it away. All right. I'm getting the green light from everybody. Y'all can hear, y'all can see. Let's do this thing. So we have Biden's first address to a joint session of Congress, and that is happening today. There's a few firsts today. The Congress itself will be only sparsely populated with a few people that they've allowed in. Also, it'll be the first time that there's two women sitting behind him in the Speaker of the House and the Vice President. With that said, something that I think is pretty funny that I wanted to start with is that Republicans are already attacking Biden's speech. Marsha Blackburn, Republican senator from Tennessee, sent an email, and the email had the words on it, "Embargoed until 10 p.m., and it was slamming Joe Biden's anti-family speech. She already knew that it was an anti-family speech, despite the fact that the speech hasn't even happened yet. And yet somehow Marsha Blackburn knew exactly what was in it, already drafted up an email, accidentally sent that email out, and that's her condemning the anti-family speech from Joe Biden. So Marsha Blackburn with the impressive forecasting of what's going to happen. If anybody's looking to buy lottery tickets, you might want to hit up Marsha Blackburn. She seems like the go-to person here to figure out what's going to happen just a little bit a ways away in the future. And actually, this is a topic that I want to focus on here. I know I'm gonna talk about the American Rescue Plan, the American Jobs Plan, the American Families Plan, which is what Joe Biden's going to be speaking about tonight at this 100-day address, this address to the joint session of Congress. But something that we've seen with more and more prevalence lately, and obviously if you watch my channel, you know that this is a big thing for me, is this idea, this Republican pushing forward this disinformation that doesn't have any basis in reality. And we've seen, a bunch of these scandals popping up lately. We saw a few days ago this idea that Joe Biden is limiting all Americans' red meat intake to four pounds per year. We also were told by right-wing media that Kamala Harris's children's book was being distributed to every migrant child on the border. Let's see, somebody said they couldn't hear me. I'm gonna raise my volume a little bit, so this should make my volume a little bit better. That Kamala Harris's children's book was being distributed to every migrant child once they got here, like a goodie bag. And it turns out, of course, shockingly, that this wasn't the case. This idea that Biden was going to limit everybody's red meat intake to 4 pounds per year. This was a study by the University of Michigan showing just what would happen if everybody cut their red meat intake by 90%, which would amount to 4 pounds per year in the United States. And it turns out that that would cut emissions by 50%. So it was just an academic study, an academic finding that showed that if we did this, that could cut the emissions that we need, with regard to greenhouse gas emissions. And so the Daily Mail, which is some right-wing rag from the UK, not Rupert Murdoch owned, although which surprised me because I did look into that, published an article that says what Biden's going to need to do. The experts are already weighing in, and what Biden's going to need to do is limit, red meat intake, limit hamburgers to 4 pounds a year, to hamburgers to once per month. And so Fox News, the most watched cable network in the United States of America, did its due diligence apparently by just looking at this article from the Daily Mail, looking at some tabloid from the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, and they, as again the most watched, the biggest cable news network in the United States of America, was like, yeah, that's our due diligence. We'll just lift that story and report on that as if it's factual. Turns out it wasn't. It's just some article, some academic finding from the University of Michigan from before Biden was even elected president. It was from 2020. Biden wasn't even in office yet. And these people just did a study. And now right-wing media is trying to confer the results of that study into Biden's climate plan as if it's some dictate from the president of the United States. This should go without saying, but an academic study finding that limiting red meat intake to 4 pounds per year does not mean that the president is forcing you to limit yourself to 4 pounds of red meat intake per year. They are not the same thing. So, and then this other idea came out of the New York Post that Kamala Harris was at the border handing every kid a book and just collecting money from every single book as it came in. So needless to say, that was not the case either. It turns out that the New York Post reporter who was responsible for writing that story came onto Twitter yesterday and announced that she had been forced to write the story, and that she went ahead and did it anyway because she supposedly didn't give enough pushback. But the message being that she clearly knew that what she was doing was wrong, didn't give enough pushback. And then the next day, once she was fact-checked by the Washington Post, once the entire country basically found the truth that no, Kamala Harris's book isn't being distributed like a goodie bag to every migrant kid coming in to the United States, that she resigned. So I know there were, and I am curious to know what people think, because there are definitely two sides to this. There's the side that says, well, good that she came out onto Twitter and said that she was forced to write the story and then resigned. And then there's another camp, of which I'll admit I'm a part of, where I say, well, better than her coming out the day after, only after she was fact-checked, only after everybody realized that she had published a story, rife with falsehoods. Better than her doing it the next day would just be to resign when you're told that, when you're forced to write a story that is false. Wouldn't that have wouldn't that show a little bit more integrity than writing it, get called out, and then say, you know what, I resign, and here's why, as if it's some noble stand she's taking. But I am curious because, then there's people who say, well, it's not that easy to resign because you have a family to feed, and not that easy to resign because, this kind of thing happens in the media where you're forced to report on something that you might not want to report on. And not everybody has the autonomy to just say, I want to write about, I want to write about seals today. I want to write about the ocean. I want to write about seals and dolphins. And well, that's great, but you're going to write about what we're going to tell you to write about. So there are two sides to this story, and I am curious what other people think in terms of her culpability here. But the way that I looked at it, I don't have a ton of sympathy for somebody who knowingly publishes disinformation or misinformation at the bare minimum. But that's just me. So moving on, another big piece of news that we got today was obviously the raid of Rudy Giuliani's apartment and his office. And so I want to switch gears here to talk about that. So the FBI arrived at Giuliani's home and office at a 6 a.m. raid. They seized his phones and computers. Here's the best part, I think, of this entire Giuliani raid situation. And that is that after God knows how long of Rudy Giuliani wailing about what else but Hunter Biden's laptop, what ended up being seized by the FBI was Rudy Giuliani's laptop. And there is just a wonderful poetic sense of poetic justice in that the laptop that was seized at the end of the day was Rudy Giuliani's laptop. So it turns out that FBI agents and the SDNY had been vying for these search warrants to be executed for months and months, and the roadblocks were actually coming from the DOJ during the Trump administration. So there were political appointees who had been blocking this search warrant from being executed, or these search warrants from being granted. Obviously, now that Trump is out of office, as soon as Merrick Garland was confirmed, and you'll notice that there was a ton of time spent obstructing Merrick Garland. He was one of the last cabinet officials to actually be confirmed, so a ton of time spent obstructing Merrick Garland. Once Merrick Garland was confirmed, then suddenly the DOJ ended its opposition to granting these search warrants, and so this dawn was carried out at 6 a.m. There was a quote here that I want to read by Giuliani's lawyer, Robert Costello. He said, let's see if we can pull this quote up. I had the full quote, but I want to find it. I don't have the full quote, but I do know that one part of the quote was calling the raid legal thuggery and say why they said something along the lines of, why would you do this to anyone, but especially Rudy Giuliani, the former personal attorney of the President of the United States, the mayor of New York, former U.S. attorney, and as if I mean, just saying outright that like somehow he's immune from like facing consequences from his actions because he was Trump's attorney. They said, how could you do this to anyone, but especially this guy? Especially this guy. How could you? This is legal thuggery, as if Rudy Giuliani, just by virtue of his titles there, that he's somehow immune from any type of prosecution or accountability for his wrongdoing. Of course, we had Andrew Giuliani, Rudy Giuliani's son, who is as charming as his father. Wait till you see this video. I actually posted a video on my channel about an hour prior to starting this live stream. Andrew Giuliani is exactly what you would imagine if someone said Andrew Giuliani is Rudy Giuliani's son. He is exactly what you would imagine. They blamed the politicization. He blamed the politicization of the deep state. That was his excuse for this. He said, this is just. Meanwhile, we know that the only reason that this search warrant wasn't executed sooner was because it was being blocked by political appointees at Bill Barr's DOJ. And so when you talk about the politicization of the DOJ, and yet the only thing having protected Rudy Giuliani was a politicized DOJ, was Bill Barr's DOJ protecting him, was Donald Trump's political appointees not allowing these search warrants to go through. I mean, you just realize just how completely backwards, just 180-degree reversed all of these things that all of these claims that they make are. They say What this is the politicization of the DOJ. No, this is quite literally the absence of politicization. That's why these search warrants were finally allowed to be executed. And by the way, it's not easy to just nab a search warrant. I want to find this paragraph here in the article that I was working off of in the New York Times, because it says exactly how difficult it is to get a search warrant. So let's pull this up. So just to obtain the search warrant, that means that investigators need to have persuaded a judge that they have sufficient reason to believe that a crime was committed and that the search would turn up evidence of the crime. So those two things needed to have happen just for the search warrant to have been executed, just for it to have been granted. So this doesn't bode well for Rudy Giuliani. Just the fact that they were there in and of itself doesn't bode well for him. By the way, I do want to switch gears real quick. I have a list here. I want to go back to what we were talking about just a few moments ago, which is this idea. I want to go back to the Kamala Harris book thing. And just to give you an idea of how pervasive these lies are when they show up on right-wing media, I want to give you a full list of all of the people who spread this lie. And by the way, this was just a fake story, fully fabricated by people at the New York Post, just some right-wing rag outlet. Ronna McDaniel, the RNC chairwoman, she tweeted, after learning officials are handing out Kamala Harris's book to migrants in facilities at the border, it's worth asking, was Harris paid for these books? Is she profiting from Biden's border crisis? Again, rich, coming from somebody who served as a mouthpiece for the Trump administration for so long. Tom Cotton. The Biden administration's weakness caused a surge of illegal immigration. Now they're forcing taxpayers to buy Kamala Harris's book to give to these illegal immigrants? Lauren Boebert, because of course, the least surprising person on this entire list. You could knock me over with a gust of wind at this one. Why is the Biden regime using taxpayer dollars to provide illegal immigrants entering the U.S. with a copy of Kamala's children's book? Steve Scalise, the House Minority Whip, tweeted, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki dodges and says, I hear it's a good book, when asked if Kamala Harris is making money off her book being handed out at border facilities. Is Kamala Harris profiting off the border crisis? Americans deserve to know. Jim Jordan, of course. Vice President Harris refuses to visit the southern border, but some migrant children are given a copy of her book upon arrival to the USA. Nothing to see here. Just a laundry list of exactly who you would think would be promoting these conspiracy theories, doing zero due diligence whatsoever, as if Kamala Harris is going, as if they're that dumb. Like, these people have gotten so used to seeing what the Trump administration did with all of their, every single scandal that they had was just dumb Watergate, And I think they just assume that everyone is as sloppy and ham-handed and egregious as the Trump people were. As if Kamala Harris within any amount of days, but especially in the first 100 days, is going to have the federal government buy her book by the tens of thousands to hand out to migrant kids. Like, it is so patently absurd, and it just goes to show that their mentality is that, oh yeah, why wouldn't people do this? Of course they would just commit this type of egregious corruption in the same exact vein that the Trump people did. So on one hand, you have the fact that it's just so blatantly corrupt that just goes to like where their mind is in all of this. And on the other hand, like beyond that, I mean, it's just the fact that they think that she would do this at all. So, with that having been said, no, there was no book being handed out by Kamala Harris. Nobody was profiting off of the presidency, and especially not in the most egregious way possible. But I think it goes to show too, I mean, something that we've seen more and more is this is how you know two things. A, that Biden's doing well, and B, that they can't find anything to attack him for, right? And so like when your big scandal is not to focus on actual issues, but instead to concoct a story that is so patently absurd on its face, this idea that Joe Biden is forcing you not to eat hamburgers, forcing the government to pay for a children's book with Kamala Harris's name on it, and then handing it out to the migrant kids as they enter each facility one by one, and just dollar signs going off in Kamala Harris's head, and they're doing it in the first like 60 days. Like they're just so desperate. Like Kamala Harris is just so desperate to shove money into her pockets that this is what she's doing within 2 months of her becoming vice president, as if she's that desperate. This, like, the Trump administration is over. Donald Trump and his family would have, I mean, dear God, if they could have turned their own supporters upside down and shook them as each single one was entering a rally or the White House grounds or the Oval Office itself, they'd have done that, because if it meant that they could get $2 more than they had 1 minute ago, they'd do it. But I mean, dear God, this administration is not so desperate to line their pockets that they would do the exact same thing. But in any case, this is how you know that this administration is doing well, when the only thing that you can point to is not just a BS scandal. It's not just like, okay, tan suit or mustard or whatever it was, but these are BS scandals that aren't even real. Like even if Joe Biden's climate plan was like, hey, we should reduce the amount of red meat that people consume, which, by the way, just personally, I would support, and I do, and I've personally cut my own amount of red meat that I consume, just because that's the step that I can take. But it's not a dictate. But even if he said, hey, this would be good for the planet, and a lot of people would do it, and a lot of people already have done it, or if you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it, because this is still America, it's still a free country. But even if he said that, the fact that that is the biggest thing that they have to point to is a testament to the fact that the guy's not doing poorly. You know what I mean? If this is the biggest thing that you have to point to, if this is your biggest beef, no pun intended, if this is the biggest thing that you have to point to is hamburgers, then that probably goes to show that he's doing okay. I kind of love that I accidentally made a beef pun. And a big part of that, too, in terms of Biden doing well, is the fact that his agenda has been embraced by both sides. And so I think Republicans are under this mistaken notion that as long as they oppose everything that Joe Biden's doing, it's not bipartisan, even though all of his agenda items have bipartisan support. Republicans are under this mistaken notion that even if you have the most popular thing in the world, even if it's like calling Friday, like if that was his policy position, and 100% of Americans are in favor of it. They're like, yeah, we think you should call Friday. That is the day of the week after all. We think you should continue calling Friday. Republicans are under this mistaken notion that all they have to do is be opposed, and then suddenly some package or plan or legislation or bill isn't bipartisan just because they oppose it, even though 100% of Americans oppose it. And they did the same thing with the American Rescue Plan, where they decided that if we can get 100% opposition to a bill, regardless of what our own constituents believe, then we can make it a partisan bill. And I think what they're learning the hard way is that that's not going to work, because having a bipartisan bill, and this is something that Biden, to his great credit, has been able to like really clearly show is that it doesn't just mean that that the people living in that one zip code do or don't oppose something. A measure of bipartisanship is what the American people more broadly think of something. And so when you have something as popular as the American Rescue Plan that had 3/4 support across the country, you can have everybody from Jim Jordan to Mitt Romney oppose it. That doesn't make it not bipartisan. It just means that a bunch of hacks in Congress attempted to stall the bill, or attempted to, are basically trying a different way to be able to say that a bill is a partisan bill, even though the vast majority of all of their constituents benefit from it. And by the way, there were even a number of people who went out and started touting the effects of that bill right after it was passed, despite not having voted for it, which goes to show just how popular it was, that you have somebody who votes no, then logs onto Twitter and starts tweeting about how great it is that their districts, their congressional districts, are going to get money now. I can't remember who it was exactly. I had a running list on Twitter, but okay, so it's 5:25 on the East Coast, 8:25. I'm sorry, 5:25 on the West Coast, 8:25 on the East Coast. We have about a half hour until Joe Biden will make his first presidential address to a joint session of Congress. If you are just tuning in, we've spoken about some scandals that have been picked up by Fox News and right-wing media that don't exist, like Kamala Harris supposedly handing out a children's book with her name on it to every migrant at the border. That ended up being a fake story that a writer was forced to write at the New York Post. And this idea that Biden is limiting everyone's red meat intake to 4 pounds per year. Also not true. That was based on a University of Michigan academic paper from 2020 that Republicans just decided was Joe Biden's climate plan. We've also spoken about the Rudy Giuliani raid that happened at 6 a.m. this morning, wherein his electronics were seized by the FBI and the SDNY. SDNY, ironically enough, is where where Giuliani served as U.S. attorney. And so now he's in the crosshairs of the exact same office where he once worked years and years and years ago, before he turned into a Looney Tune. By the way, this is coming from somebody. I grew up in New Jersey, had a signed picture of Rudy Giuliani and Joe Torre. Joe Torre was the manager of the New York Yankees, standing above the rubble on 9/11, framed in my room. I was a Giuliani fan. So there's a part of me that that hurts from seeing what he's turned into, but it just goes to show that you can really fall off the deep end and lose the support of someone who as a child had your picture signed in his bedroom. A signed picture. It was the only signed picture that I had. Giuliani and Joe Torre. So what I would expect to hear from Biden about tonight would be three things, three tenets of the entire Build Back Better agenda. And so the first is obviously the American Rescue Plan, massively popular plan. I do want to mention one thing, and that is that Republicans have had a tough time attacking Biden for the American Rescue Plan, for his stimulus package, as opposed to Obama for his stimulus package, the American Recovery Act, because, of course, every Democrat comes into office having to clean up the mess left by the previous Republican. So it seems that, according to polling, Biden's plan is viewed as less radical, less extreme, less liberal than Obama's plan. I'm sure that you can all figure out why that is, even though I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Biden's plan was bigger than the stimulus that was passed by Obama. But don't quote me on that. But I believe that Biden's $1.9 trillion relief package, the American Rescue Plan, was bigger than Obama's. So if you want to venture a guess as to why Barack Obama is seen as more radical and Republicans are having trouble painting Joe Biden as being as or more radical than Barack Obama, be my guest. I'm sure you only need one guess. But in any case, the American Rescue Plan, obviously, he'll tout the fact that they were able to pass a massive $1.9 trillion plan that included relief checks to 85% of Americans, included money for states and localities so that we could pay for teachers, that we could pay for first responders, firefighters, police officers, all of the people who Republicans love to, pander to and use and prop up while they're touting how patriotic they are, right? But they denied them all that funding at the end of the day. So we're able to get money to states and localities, and finally we're able to get money for vaccine distribution. And obviously what has come out of that is the fact that we have 200 million shots in less than 100 days. Now, so that we are clear about the extent to which 200 million shots in less than 100 days is a major accomplishment, I'm sure that you've seen the video, or if not, I'll tell you about the video of Dan Crenshaw, the Republican from Texas, who came out in January on Fox News and said, was downplaying Biden's goal of 100 million shots in the first 100 days. And he said, if you really want to impress me, double it. 200 million shots in the first 100 days. Then I will be impressed. I'm saying it right here. I'll be impressed if he can accomplish 200 million shots in under 100 days. So it took Joe Biden and the White House 92 days to reach 200 million shots. We haven't heard a word yet from Dan Crenshaw, although in his defense, Dan Crenshaw is recovering from eye surgery. So I'm sure he's just dying to get back here so that he can start congratulating Joe Biden for the exact thing that he said he would congratulate him for. By the way, I got my vaccine, got Moderna, so I'm vaccinated. I had like very, very, very slight side effects just the day after. I had a headache and I was pretty tired. Almost took a nap, but powered through. And the next day, the weirdest thing, weirder than just getting sick for one day, is waking up the next day where, normally like you feel like if you get sick that it's just gonna be like, okay, I'm sick today. Hopefully I'm like 25% better tomorrow, a little bit better the day after that. And you just like trudge your way out of it. But to wake up after you feel like crap the very next day and feel completely fine is super bizarre. So that was probably the most striking thing. But in any case, get your vaccines, people. Get vaccinated so we can get back to normal. And by the way, I know that there's like vaccine hesitancy is real. I have people in my own family who are super hesitant to get the vaccine, and ultimately everybody in my entire family across the country has. So that was good. So, I just think the most important thing to like remember is like, okay, there are side effects from this vaccine, but the side effects pale in comparison to how COVID would actually be. So just get the vaccine. If you want it to be easier, get the J&J. It's just one shot. Anyway, I feel like I'm probably preaching to the choir with this. I don't imagine that there's a lot of people who are anti-vaxxers that are actually watching this stream. So aside from the already passed American Jobs Plan. Now we're looking into, the American Rescue Plan. Now we're already looking into the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan. So just to be clear, because a lot of people, I think the biggest thing is like, the biggest issue with coming off of the Obama administration was that you have your accomplishments that weren't adequately touted. And so, it's hard for people to really be able to, even in the aftermath of the ACA, Obamacare passing, they were so hesitant and reticent to basically promote themselves and beat their chests a little bit that whole messaging vacuum was seized on by the Republicans. And so if you remember the rollout of the ACA, what's the number one thing that you remember about it? It's that all we heard was how bad healthcare.gov was, the botched rollout of the healthcare website. And that's because, we have this monumental change with the ACA. And I know that there's plenty of people who say that it didn't go far enough. It was just, that we still just entrenched a system with insurance companies. And they're right. But it was still the farthest that we'd gone in terms of reforming our healthcare system in my lifetime, probably in most of your lifetimes as well. So, and yet, hesitant to beat their chests about it, that messaging vacuum, the Republicans seized on it and basically got to make it all about how the healthcare website was botched. And so I think, and then contrast that to the Trump administration, where Donald could put on both of his shoes in the morning and he'd be like, great, military parade, anyone? We did it. Big day today. Both shoes on, both of my feet. Let's go, round up the troops. So seeing, these monumental successes from one administration kind of go untouted versus small, whatever accomplishments from the next one, where they would, tout it like it was like they just knocked down the Berlin Wall. I think the Biden administration finally recognizes and acknowledges the importance of promoting all of this stuff. So, and it's important for us to know too what the hell is going on, like in politics, and what's actually passing. I mean, especially when you're dealing with one of, I believe the American Rescue Plan was the second biggest bill that was ever passed. So it's important to know what was in it. And luckily for us, what was in that one was pretty easy to identify. I mean, a major part of that, a quarter of that, was just those relief checks to 85% of Americans. $1,400 stimulus checks, then money for states and localities, money for vaccine and vaccine distribution sites. And we can see the benefits of all that. We can see these vaccine distribution centers. We can see the number of people getting vaccinated. It's at, I think 80-something% of seniors have been vaccinated by now, 30% of the entire population. And even these countries who were far outpacing us in terms of actually containing the virus around the world are lagging behind us in terms of vaccination rates. I have friends in the UK who still, let's see what's, it looks like we're getting some people finally entering the room. So again, the first time that there will be two women standing behind Joe Biden as he gives his address to a joint session of Congress. The first time ever that two women will be up on the dais.
Sorry, Mike.
So as you can see, making their way into the chamber right now. By the way, this would be a good time for me to ask. If you're not yet subscribed to my channel, if you could please hit the subscribe button. I don't do memberships. I'll never ask for money. But if you could subscribe, I'll do about a video a day. I try to hit the most important breaking news story. And so if you can give me about, 5 to 10 minutes a day, subscribe to my channel, that'd be great. I'd appreciate it. So thank you.
Okay, so those are your...
It's kind of fascinating to watch this part of all of it.
Okay, here we are. We have members.
I believe it was last year at Trump's joint session of Congress that Pelosi tore that speech in half. I believe that was a year ago. It was definitely this event, but I can't remember the exact time frame. Everything just kind of melts together in one indistinguishable blur of not sleeping a lot. And thank you, by the way, to the people who are watching on this channel. I appreciate it. I know there's a lot of places you can watch and TV channels that you can watch, so I appreciate it. When Biden comes up, I'll also make this full screen, so you won't have to look at me.
That's why I'm a good subordinate. I follow orders. Well, you're a good FBI. Interesting. This is so bizarre. It's really weird, isn't it?
What's also interesting is that there's no designated survivor. So usually in instances like this, where you have the president and the vice president, I mean, you have a good portion of the line of succession in one place. You have the president, the vice president, the president pro tempore, Speaker of the House, all in one place. You would have somebody designated away from all of this as the designated survivor in case something were to happen. That person would then, because of the line of succession, become president. And I believe that was supposed to be Patrick Leahy, but I don't believe there is one this year. So I guess that means they feel confident. We have Ted Cruz managed to show up, managed to avoid the draw of a Mexican vacation, managed to force himself to stay in Washington, D.C., probably because there's cameras there, and if there's one thing Ted Cruz won't let himself to avoid, it's some camera time. By the way, I figure I could mention this now, but I will be interviewing Pete Buttigieg for my next interview. So I don't think I've ever come out before an interview actually happened and said who it was, but there's a good number of people watching here, and so tight-knit community of people watching here. So I figured I'd let you know that my next interview will be with Secretary Mayor Pete. So be on the lookout for that. Obviously, all of my interviews come out on Mondays on my channel. So if you want to see that interview, just subscribe and check it out Monday morning. So Christine had just asked, Brian, when do you think we'll hear from Trump about the Giuliani raid today? You know, he's probably crapping himself right now. I would be shocked if we don't hear something from Trump. But what I found is the progression of me caring about things that Donald Trump said post-presidency went from, okay, he posted something. He posted some press release. Look at it and tweet it out. Publish it. Get it out. And then it went from, okay, Donald Trump posted something. I don't think I'm going to tweet it, though, but I want to read it. To now, it's just, oh, Donald Trump said something cool. Cool. So, I mean, this is just like from my end. There was a clear point where I stopped sharing it because I thought that, I thought deplatforming clearly works, right? Like his message isn't getting out there. His bananas, errant synapse firing in his brain, and so he just vomits out words 127 times a day on the internet. We don't have the fact that we don't have to hear that anymore is just healthy for democracy. But then beyond that, I think the fact that so I made a concerted effort not to share that stuff because he was deplatformed, and so why do I want to help him replatform? But then there became a point where even I, just as a news consumer, stopped caring. And that's where I'm at now. Like, I know what he's going to say. Everybody knows what he's going to say. If I asked 3,000 of you watching right now what a Trump statement about the Rudy Giuliani raid would look like, all of you would get it right. And so I think, it's the same stuff. It's exactly what we think it is. It's tired at this point. And so I just I'm sure he'll post something out, and the people who help amplify his messages will be happy to post that online. But I've seen that being done by fewer and fewer people, and I think the thing is we just know exactly what's going to be in it, and we don't care. And also, the dysfunction of government, the WWE-ification of Washington D.C. versus like competence. There's just no comparison anymore. I mean, this is, if ever we've needed a competent government, it's now. But just in any case, after 4 years of that mayhem, I think everyone's just tired. And we can already see that, according to polling, he's lost something like 20% support. So
The joint session will come to order. The chair appoints as members of the Committee on the part of the House to escort the President of the United States into the chamber. The gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer. The gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Clyburn. The gentlewoman from Massachusetts, Ms. Clark. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Jeffries. The gentleman from California, Mr. Aguilar. The gentlewoman from Delaware, Ms. Blunt Rochester. The gentleman from California, Mr. McCarthy. The gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney. The gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Cole. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Brady. The gentleman from Utah, Mr. Owens. And the gentlewoman from Iowa, Mrs. Miller Meeks.
The President of the Senate, at the direction of that body, appoints the following senators as members of the Committee on the part of the Senate to escort the President of the United States into the House chamber. The Senator from New York, Mr. Schumer. The Senator from Vermont, Mr. Leahy. The Senator from Illinois, Mr. Durbin. The Senator from Michigan, Ms. Stabenow. The Senator from Vermont, Mr. Sanders. The Senator from Minnesota, Ms. Klobuchar. The Senator from Kentucky, Mr. McConnell. The Senator from South Dakota, Mr. Thune. The Senator from Wyoming, Mr. Barrasso. The Senator from Iowa, Ms. Ernst. The Senator from Missouri, Mr. Blunt. The Senator from Florida, Mr. Scott.
The members of the Escort Committee will exit the chamber through the lobby doors, the right and left of the Speaker's podium.
By the way, I just want to note there was a piece of breaking news. The White House did not get a heads up from the DOJ on the Giuliani raid today. So the White House was not notified of that. It just goes to show, I mean, this is how it should be, right? This is the line that should exist between the Justice Department and the White House. So the White House did not know that there was a raid being carried out on the on Giuliani's home and offices.
They don't announce the chairman of the joint chiefs that this announces like this. When do we announce these other? Is there?
Trying to keep up.
I know, you're always targeted. I think 10 minutes starts. Right? Just talking to McConnell.
How's Linda doing?
I had a good talk with McConnell. I said, I said, you know what? I said, your speech on certification best.
Yeah, but it's causing him a hell of a lot of grief.
Do you hear the people who are getting caught on the mic talking about McConnell? Anyway, not all that interesting. They don't even seem that interested. We have less than 10 minutes now.
I give you guys all.
So what we'll hear a lot from Joe Biden tonight is we'll hear about the American Rescue Plan, which I've spoken about at length here. We'll hear about the forthcoming, the proposals now for the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan. And so obviously the Jobs Plan will focus on investments in roads, bridges, airports, mass transit, getting lead pipes, eliminating lead pipes and ensuring clean drinking water, which, it's 2021 and we still have that. A renewed electric grid, the importance of which was made abundantly clear with what happened in Texas. Plugging oil and gas wells so that methane isn't leaking into the atmosphere anymore. Creating a national network of electric vehicle chargers. Getting high-speed broadband to 100% of Americans, which would overwhelmingly benefit rural Americans who probably didn't vote for Joe Biden. But, it's a testament to the bipartisanship of this plan. And then, of course, retrofitting homes and buildings, schools, upgrading veterans hospitals and federal buildings, and a number of other things. And then, of course, the American Families Plan will extend the child tax credit. It'll offer 4 years of free public education. It'll offer free universal pre-K, free community college for 2 years, national paid family leave, and it would end loopholes for tax cheats, basically. A lot of this, if not all of this, is going to be paid for by the proposed increase in the corporate tax rate, which is at 21%, but would go up to 35%, as well as an increased marginal tax rate for individuals of 39.6%. And you'll remember that, while Republicans are crying out about how this is
Madam Speaker, the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps.
while this is some astronomical number, the highest marginal tax rate was 39.6% as late as 2018. Also for most of the 90s, also from 50 years, from like 1932 to 1986. So just something to keep in mind. Also raising the capital gains tax for people earning over $1 million. So when Republicans attack these increases in both the marginal tax rate for individual earners and the capital gains tax, when they're attacking these increases, think about who they're going to bat for. because it's not 99% of Americans. It's the top 1% who are actually have over $1 million invested in the market, who are actually earning enough to reach the 39.6% marginal tax rate. So I think that's just something to keep in mind. And by the way, that's something that's popular with almost 3/4 of Americans. So not exactly something that we should shy away from touting. The vast majority of Americans, something incredibly popular, is raising taxes so that the wealthiest people in this country pay their fair share. You saw there Kamala and Doug saying what's up. Douglas, he's been rebranded.
Madam Speaker, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
So John Roberts will be the only Supreme Court justice in attendance tonight. I believe normally it would be all of them, but obviously because of COVID, it's just going to be John Roberts. Again, we're only a couple of minutes away from Biden's speech beginning here. And I think the chamber being so empty, is really, at the end of the day, two things. It's a testament to what Biden inherited, and in a way, a big part of why he won the presidency, because of the last administration's bungled handling of this pandemic, but also a testament to just proceeding responsibly and not packing all of these people in a room just because you could. And it just goes to show the difference because, think about it. The last president in the height of this pandemic was having campaign rallies, mask optional campaign rallies. Herman Cain died after the Tulsa rally. And yet now, even though I'd assume Jill Biden's here, even though I'd assume the vast majority, if not all of these people are vaccinated, they're still taking the appropriate precautions just to keep people safe. Okay, we're about 3 minutes away from 9 p.m., which is when the speech should be starting. That's 9 p.m. Eastern. Okay, and it looks like the next person to enter will likely be Joe Biden. And again, I'll ask one more time, and I appreciate it. If you're not yet subscribed to my channel, if you could please subscribe. I do about one video a day, about five to 8 minutes long, and cover the biggest stories of whatever the day are. So yeah, I won't ask for memberships or money or anything like that, but if you can please subscribe, I'd appreciate that. So thank you.
Madam Speaker, representatives of the President's Cabinet.
Again, for people just joining, this is the first time in American history that there's two women going to be standing behind the president while he makes his address to the joint session of Congress. Obviously, Speaker of the House and the Vice President, first time it's a woman. So this will make history for a number of reasons. The other reason being the occupancy of the chamber itself. And thanks to people in the chat too. I try to get a few glances in there while I can. And to the moderators of the chat, doing a great job making sure it's not too hellish for people. Okay. And it's 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, and we're set to begin right now. Another fun fact is that everybody who arrived in that chamber tonight got their gift bag with their 4 pounds of meat for the year.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
And again, Senator, you did a great job.
And it looks like the C-SPAN cameras here are prepping for Biden's entrance and trying to get the right angle.
You know, messed up the first time, made you do it again.
Okay. Looks like we are moments away. I believe, I'm going to jinx myself just by saying it, but I believe the next person to enter will be Joe Biden. I believe everybody in the chamber that's going to be in the chamber is now in the chamber. There he is.
Another gavel.
Madam Speaker, the President of the United States.
All right. Yeah, something tells me that one's not going to get ripped up.
Members
This
of
time.
Congress, I have the high privilege and distinct honor to present to you the President of the United States.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Good to be back. As Mitch and Chuck will understand, it's good to be almost home. Down the hall. Anyway, thank you all. Madam Speaker, Madam Vice President. No president has ever said those words from this podium. No president has ever said those words. And it's about time. First Lady, I'm her husband. Second Gentleman, Chief Justice, members of the United States Congress and the Cabinet, distinguished guests, my fellow Americans. While the setting tonight is familiar, this gathering is just a little bit different. A reminder of the extraordinary times we're in. Throughout our history, presidents have come to this chamber to speak to Congress, to the nation, and to the world, to declare war, to celebrate peace, to announce new plans and possibilities. Tonight, I come to talk about crisis and opportunity, about rebuilding the nation, revitalizing our democracy, and winning the future for America. I stand here tonight, one day shy of the 100th day of my administration. 100 days since I took the oath of office and lifted my hand off our family Bible and inherited a nation, we all did, that was in crisis. The worst pandemic in a century, the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. Now, After just 100 days, I can report to the nation, America is on the move again. Turning peril into possibility, crisis to opportunity, setbacks into strength. We all know life can knock us down, but in America, we never, ever, ever stay down. Americans always get up. Today, that's what we're doing. America's rising anew, choosing hope over fear, truth over lies, and light over darkness. After 100 days of rescue and renewal, America is ready for a takeoff, in my view. We're working again, dreaming again, discovering again, and leading the world again. We have shown each other and the world that there's no quit in America, none. 100 days ago, America's house was on fire. We had to act. And thanks to the extraordinary leadership of Speaker Pelosi, Majority Leader Schumer, and the overwhelming support of the American people, Democrats, Independents, and Republicans, we did act. Together, we passed the American Rescue Plan, one of the most consequential rescue packages in American history. We're already seeing the results. We're already seeing the results. After I promised we'd get 100 million COVID-19 vaccine shots into people's arms in 100 days, we will have provided over 220 million COVID shots in those 100 days. Thanks to all the help of all of you. We're marshaling, with your help, everyone's help, we're marshaling every federal resource. We've gotten vaccines to nearly 40,000 pharmacies and over 700 community health centers where the poorest of the poor can be reached. We're setting up community vaccination sites, developing mobile units to get to hard-to-reach communities. Today, 90% of Americans now live within 5 miles of a vaccination site. Everyone over the age of 16, everyone is now eligible to get vaccinated right now, right away. Go get vaccinated, America. Go and get the vaccination. They're available. You're eligible now. When I was sworn in on January 20th, less than 1% of the seniors in America were fully vaccinated against COVID-19. 100 days later, 70% of seniors in America over 65 are protected, fully protected. Senior deaths from COVID-19 are down 80% since January, down 80% because of all of you. And more than half of all the adults in America have gotten at least one shot. A mass vaccination center in Glendale, Arizona, I asked the nurse, I said, "What's it like?" She looked at me and she said, "It's like every shot is giving a dose of hope," was her phrase, a dose of hope. A dose of hope for an educator in Florida who has a child suffering from an autoimmune disease. Wrote to me, said she was worried about bringing the virus home. She said she then got vaccinated at a large site in her car. She said she sat in her car when she got vaccinated and just cried out of joy and cried out of relief. Parents, seeing the smiles on their kids' faces for those who are able to go back to school because the teachers and school bus drivers and cafeteria workers have been vaccinated. Grandparents, hugging their children and grandchildren instead of pressing hands against the window to say goodbye. It means everything. Those things mean everything. You know, there's still, you all know it, you know it better than any group of Americans, there's still more work to do to beat this virus. We can't let our guard down. But tonight, I can say, because of you, the American people, our progress these past 100 days against one of the worst pandemics in history has been one of the greatest logistical achievements this country's ever seen. What else have we done in those first 100 days? We kept our commitment, Democrats and Republicans, of sending $1,400 rescue checks to 85% of American households. We've already sent more than 160 million checks out the door. It's making a difference. You all know it when you go home. For many people, it's making all the difference in the world. The single mom in Texas who wrote me, she said she couldn't work, but she said the relief check put food on the table and saved her and her son from eviction from their apartment. A grandmother in Virginia who told me she immediately took her granddaughter to the eye doctor, something she said she put off for months because she didn't have the money. One of the defining images, at least from my perspective in this crisis, has been cars lined up for miles. And not people just barely able to start those cars, nice cars, lined up for miles, waiting for a box of food to be put in their trunk. I don't know about you, but I didn't ever think I'd see that in America. And all of this is through no fault of their own. No fault of their own, these people are in this position. That's why the rescue plan is delivering food and nutrition assistance to millions of Americans facing hunger. And hunger's down sharply already. We're also providing rental assistance. You all know this, but the American people, I want to make sure they understand. Keeping people from being evicted from their homes. Providing loans to small businesses that reopen and keep their employees on the job. During these 100 days, an additional 800,000 Americans enrolled in the Affordable Care Act when I established a special sign-up period to do that. 800,000 in that period. We're making one of the largest one-time investments ever in improving health care for veterans. Critical investments to address the opioid crisis. And maybe most importantly, thanks to the American Rescue Plan, we're on track to cut child poverty in America in half this year. And in the process, while this was all going on, the economy created more than 1,300,000 new jobs in 100 days. More jobs in the first 100 days than any president on record. The International Monetary Fund is now estimating our economy will grow at a rate of more than 6% this year. That will be the fastest pace of economic growth in this country in nearly 4 decades. America's moving forward, but we can't stop now. We're in competition with China and other countries to win the 21st century. We're at a great inflection point in history. We have to do more than just build back better. We have to build back better. We have to compete more strenuously than we have. Throughout our history, if you think about it, public investment in infrastructure has literally transformed America, our attitudes as well as our opportunities. The Transcontinental Railroad, the interstate highways, united 2 oceans and brought a totally new age of progress to the United States of America. Universal public schools and college aid opened wide the doors of opportunity. Scientific breakthroughs took us to the moon. Now we're on Mars, discovering vaccines, gave us the internet, and so much more. These are investments we made together as one country, and investments that only the government was in a position to make. Time and again, they propel us into the future. That's why I proposed the American Jobs Plan, a once-in-a-generation investment in America itself. This is the largest jobs plan since World War II. Creates jobs to upgrade our transportation infrastructure. Jobs modernizing our roads, bridges, highways. Jobs building ports and airports, rail corridors, transit lines. It's clean water. And today, up to 10 million homes in America and more than 400,000 schools and child care centers have pipes with lead in them, including drinking water. A clear and present danger to our children's health. American Jobs Plan creates jobs replacing 100% of the nation's lead pipes and service lines, so every American can drink clean water. And in the process, it will create thousands and thousands of good-paying jobs. It creates jobs connecting every American with high-speed internet, including 35% of the rural America that still doesn't have it. This is going to help our kids and our businesses succeed in the 21st century economy. And I'm asking the Vice President to lead this effort, if she would, because I know it will get done. Creates jobs building a modern power grid. Our grids are vulnerable to storms, hacks, catastrophic failures with tragic results, as we saw in Texas and elsewhere during the winter storms. The American Jobs Plan will create jobs that lay thousands of miles of transmission lines needed to build a resilient and fully clean grid. We can do that. Look, the American Jobs Plan will help millions of people get back to their jobs and back to their careers. 2 million women have dropped out of the workforce during this pandemic. 2 million. And too often because they couldn't get the care they needed to care for their child or care for an elderly parent who needs help. 800,000 families are on the Medicare waiting list right now to get home care for their aging parent or loved one with disability. If you think it's not important, check out in your own district, Democrat or Republican. Democrat or Republican voters. Their great concern, almost as much as their children, is taking care of an elderly loved one who can't be left alone. Medicaid contemplated it, but this plan is going to help those families and create jobs for our caregivers with better wages and better benefits, continuing a cycle of growth. For too long, we've failed to use the most important word when it comes to meeting the climate crisis: jobs. 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 For me, when I think climate change, I think jobs. The American Jobs Plan will put engineers and construction workers to work building more energy-efficient buildings and homes. Electrical workers, IBEW members installing 500,000 charging stations along our highways so we can own the electric car market. Farmers planting cover crops so they can reduce the carbon dioxide in the air and get paid for doing it. Look, think about it. There is simply no reason why the blades for wind turbines can't be built in Pittsburgh instead of Beijing. No reason. None. No reason. So, folks, there's no reason why American workers can't lead the world in the production of electric vehicles and batteries. I mean, there is no reason. We have the capacity. We're the brightest, best trained people in the world. The American Jobs Plan is going to create millions of good-paying jobs, jobs Americans can raise a family on. As my dad would then say, with a little breathing room. And all the investments in the American Job Plan will be guided by one principle: buy American. Buy American. And I might note parenthetically, that does not violate any trade agreement. It's been the law since the 30s. Buy American. American tax dollars are going to be used to buy American products made in America to create American jobs. That's the way it's supposed to be, and it will be in this administration. And I made it clear to all my cabinet people, their ability to give exemptions has been strenuously limited. It will be American products. Now, I know some of you at home are wondering whether these jobs are for you. So many of you, so many of the folks I grew up with, feel left behind, forgotten, in an economy that's so rapidly changing. It's frightening. I want to speak directly to you, because you think about it. That's what people are most worried about. Can I fit in? Independent experts estimate the American Jobs Plan will add millions of jobs and trillions of dollars to economic growth in the years to come. It is an 8-year program. These are good-paying jobs that can't be outsourced. Nearly 90% of the infrastructure jobs created in the American Jobs Plan do not require a college degree. 75% don't require an associate's degree. The American Jobs Plan is a blue-collar blueprint to build America. That's what it is. And it recognizes something I've always said in this chamber and the other. Good guys and women on Wall Street, but Wall Street didn't build this country. The middle class built the country, and unions built the middle class. So that's why I'm calling on Congress to pass Protect the Right to Organize Act, the PRO Act, and send it to my desk so we can support the right to unionize. And by the way, while you're thinking about sending things to my desk, let's raise the minimum wage to $15. No one working 40 hours a week, no one working 40 hours a week should live below the poverty line. We need to ensure greater equity and opportunity for women. And while we're doing this, let's get the Paycheck Fairness Act to my desk as well, equal pay. It's been much too long. And if you wonder whether it's too long, look behind me. And finally, the American Jobs Plan will be the biggest increase in non-defense research and development on record. We'll see more technological change, and some of you know more about this than I do. We'll see more technological change in the next 10 years than we saw in the last 50. That's how rapidly artificial intelligence and so much more is changing. And we're falling behind the competition with the rest of the world. Decades ago, we used to invest 2% of our gross domestic product in America, 2% of our gross domestic product in research and development. Today, Mr. Secretary, that's less than 1%. China and other countries are closing in fast. We have to develop and dominate the products and technologies of the future. Advanced batteries, biotechnology, computer chips, clean energy. The Secretary of Defense can tell you, and those of you who work on national security issues know, the Defense Department has an agency called DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. The people who set up before I came here, and that's been a long time ago, to develop breakthroughs that enhance our national security. That's their only job. And it's a semi-separate agency. It's under the Defense Department. It's led to everything from the discovery of the internet to GPS and so much more that's enhanced our security. The National Institute of Health, the NIH, I believe, should create a similar advanced research projects agency for health. And here's what it would do. It would have a singular purpose: to develop breakthroughs to prevent, detect, and treat diseases like Alzheimer's, diabetes, and cancer. I'll still never forget when we passed the cancer proposal in the last year I was vice president. Almost $9 million going to NIH. And if you excuse the point of personal privilege, I'll never forget you standing, Mitch, and saying, "Name it after my deceased son." It meant a lot. But so many of us have deceased sons, daughters, and relatives who died of cancer. I can think of no more worthy investment. I know of nothing that is more bipartisan. So let's end cancer as we know it. It's within our power. It's within our power to do it. Investments in jobs and infrastructure like the ones we're talking about have often had bipartisan support in the past. Vice President Harris and I met regularly in the Oval Office with Democrats and Republicans and discussed the jobs plan. And I applaud a group of Republican senators who just put forward their own proposal. So let's get to work. I wanted to lay out before the Congress my plan before we got into the deep discussions. I'd like to meet with those who have ideas that are different, they think are better. I welcome those ideas. But the rest of the world is not waiting for us. I just want to be clear. From my perspective, doing nothing is not an option. Look, we can't be so busy competing with one another that we forget the competition that we have with the rest of the world to win the 21st century. Secretary Blinken can tell you, I spent a lot of time with President Xi. Traveled over 17,000 miles with him. Spent, they tell me, over 24 hours in private discussions with him. When he called to congratulate him, we had a 2-hour discussion. He's deadly earnest about becoming the most significant, consequential nation in the world. He and others, autocrats, think that democracy can't compete in the 21st century with autocracies because it takes too long to get consensus. To win that competition for the future, in my view, we also need to make a once-in-a-generation investment in our families and our children. That's why I've introduced the American Families Plan tonight, which addresses 4 of the biggest challenges facing American families and in turn America. First is access to good education. When this nation made 12 years of public education universal in the last century, it made us the best educated, best prepared nation in the world. It's, I believe, the overwhelming reason that propelled us to where we got in the 20th century. But the world's caught up or catching up. They're not waiting. I would say parenthetically, if we were sitting down, we set a bipartisan committee together and said, okay, we're going to decide what we do in terms of government providing for free education. I wonder whether we'd think, as we did in the 20th century, that 12 years is enough in the 21st century. I doubt it. 12 years is no longer enough today to compete with the rest of the world in the 21st century. That's why my American Families Plan guarantees 4 additional years of public education for every person in America, starting as early as we can. The great universities in this country have conducted studies of the last 10 years. It shows that adding 2 years of universal high-quality preschool for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old, no matter what background they come from, puts them in the position to be able to compete all the way through 12 years and increases exponentially their prospect of graduating and going on beyond graduation. The research shows when a young child goes to school, not daycare, they're far more likely to graduate from high school and go to college or something after high school. When you add 2 years of free community college on top of that, you begin to change the dynamic. We can do that. And we'll increase Pell Grants and invest in historical black colleges and universities, tribal colleges, minority-serving institutions. The reason is they don't have the endowments. But their students are just as capable of learning about cybersecurity, just as capable of learning about metallurgy, all the things that are going on that provide those jobs of the future. Jill is a community college professor who teaches today as First Lady. She's long said, if I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times. Joe, any country that out-educates us is going to outcompete us. She'll be deeply involved in leading this effort. Thank you, Jill. Second thing we need, American Families Plan will provide access to quality, affordable child care. We guarantee when I'm proposing the legislation, we guarantee that low and middle income families will pay no more than 7% of their income for high-quality care for children up to the age of 5. The most hard-pressed working families won't have to spend a dime. Third, the American Families Plan will finally provide up to 12 weeks of paid leave and medical leave, family medical leave. We're one of the few industrial countries in the world. No one should have to choose between a job and a paycheck or taking care of themselves and their loved ones or parent or spouse or child. And fourth, the American Family Plan puts directly into the pockets of millions of Americans. In March, we expanded tax credit for every child in a family, up to $3,000 per child if they're under 6 years of age. Over 6 years of age. And $3,600 for children over 6 years of age. With 2 parents, 2 kids, that's $7,200 in the pockets that are going to help take care of your family. And that will help more than 65 million children and help cut child care poverty in half. And we can afford it. So we did that in in the last piece of legislation we passed. But let's extend that child care tax credit at least through the end of 2025. The American Rescue Plan lowered health care premiums for 9 million Americans who buy their coverage under the Affordable Care Act. I know that's really popular this side of the aisle. But let's make that provision permanent so their premiums don't go back up. In addition to my family's plan, I'm going to work with Congress to address this year other critical priorities for American families. The Affordable Care Act has been a lifeline for millions of Americans, protecting people with pre-existing conditions, protecting women's health, and the pandemic has demonstrated how badly it's needed. Let's lower deductibles for working families on the Affordable Care Act. And let's lower prescription drug costs. We know how to do this. The last president had that as an objective. We all know how outrageously expensive drugs are in America. In fact, we pay the highest prescription drug prices of anywhere in the world, right here in America. Nearly 3 times for the same drug, nearly 3 times what other countries pay. We have to change that, and we can. Let's do what we talked about for all the years I was down here in this body, in Congress. Let's give Medicare the power to save hundreds of billions of dollars by negotiating lower drug prescription prices. And by the way, it won't just help people on Medicare. Lower prescription drug costs for everyone. And the money we save, which is billions of dollars, can go to strengthen the Affordable Care Act and expand Medicare coverage benefits without costing taxpayers an additional penny. It's within our power to do it. Let's do it now. We've talked about it long enough, Democrats and Republicans. Let's get it done this year. This is all about a simple premise. Health care should be a right, not a privilege in America. So, how do we pay for my jobs and family plan? I made it clear we can do it without increasing the deficits. Let's start with what I will not do. I will not impose any tax increase on people making less than $400,000. But it's time for corporate America and the wealthiest 1% of Americans to just begin to pay their fair share. Just their fair share. Sometimes I have arguments with my friends in the Democratic Party. I think you should be able to become a billionaire and a millionaire, but pay your fair share. A recent study shows that 55 of the nation's biggest corporations paid 0 federal tax last year. Those 55 corporations made in excess of $40 billion in profit. A lot of companies also evade taxes through tax havens in Switzerland and Bermuda and the Cayman Islands. And they benefit from tax loopholes and deductions for offshoring jobs and shifting profits overseas. It's not right. We're going to reform corporate taxes so they pay their fair share and help pay for the public investments their businesses will benefit from as well. We're going to reward work, not just wealth. We take the top tax bracket for the wealthiest 1% of Americans, those making over $400,000 or more, back up to where it was when George W. Bush was president, when he started, 39.6%. That's where it was when George W. was president. We're going to get rid of the loopholes, allow Americans to make more than $1 million a year and pay a lower tax rate on their capital gains than Americans who receive a paycheck. We're only going to affect 0.3% of all Americans by that action, 0.3%. And the IRS is going to crack down on millionaires and billionaires who cheat on their taxes. It's estimated to be billions of dollars by think tanks that are left, right, and center. I'm not looking to punish anybody, but I will not add a tax burden, additional tax burden to the middle class in this country. They're already paying enough. I believe what I propose is fair, fiscally responsible, and it raises revenue to pay for the plans I propose and will create millions of jobs that will grow the economy and enhance our financial standing in the country. When you hear someone say they don't want to raise taxes on the wealthiest 1% or corporate America, ask them whose taxes you want to raise. Instead, who's they're going to cut? Look, the big tax cut of 2017. Remember, it was supposed to pay for itself. That was how it was sold. And generate vast economic growth. Instead, it added $2 trillion to the deficit. It was a huge windfall for corporate America and those at the very top. Instead of using the tax saving to raise wages and invest in research and development, it poured billions of dollars into the pockets of CEOs. In fact, the pay gap between CEOs and their workers is now among the largest in history. According to one study, CEOs make 320 times what the average worker in their corporation makes. It used to be below 100. The pandemic has only made things worse. 20 million Americans lost their job in the pandemic, working and middle-class Americans. At the same time, roughly 650 billionaires in America saw their net worth increase by more than $1 trillion in the same exact period. Let me say it again. 650 people increased their wealth by more than $1 trillion during this pandemic. And they're now worth more than $4 trillion. My fellow Americans, trickle down. Trickle down economics has never worked. And it's time to grow the economy from the bottom and the middle out. You know, there's a broad consensus of economists left, right, and center, and they agree what I'm proposing will help create millions of jobs and generate historic economic growth. These are among the highest values investments we can make as a nation. I've often said our greatest strength is the power of our example, not just the example of our power. In my conversations with world leaders, and I've spoken to over 38, 40 of them now, I've made it known that America's back. And you know what they say? The comment I hear most of all from them is they say, we see America's back, but for how long? But for how long? My fellow Americans, we have to show not just that we're back, but that we're back to stay, and that we aren't going to go it alone. We're going to do it by leading with our allies. No one nation can deal with all the crises of our time, from terrorism to nuclear proliferation, mass migration, cybersecurity, climate change, as well as what we're experiencing now, the pandemics. There's no wall high enough to keep any virus out. And our own vaccine supply, as it grows to meet our needs, and we're meeting them, will become an arsenal for vaccines for other countries, just as America is an arsenal for democracy for the world, and in consequence influence the world. But every American will have access before that occurs. Every American will have access be fully covered by COVID-19 from the vaccines we have. Look, the climate crisis is not our fight alone, it's a global fight. The United States accounts, as all of you know, less than 15% of carbon emissions. The rest of the world accounts for 85%. That's why I kept my commitment to rejoin the Paris Accord, because if we do everything perfectly, it's not going to ultimately matter. I kept my commitment to convene a climate summit right here in America with all the major economies of the world: China, Russia, India, European Union. And I said I'd do it in my first 100 days. I want to be very blunt about it. My attempt was to make sure that the world could see there was a consensus, that we are at an inflection point in history. The consensus is if we act to save the planet, we can create millions of jobs and economic growth and opportunity and raise the standard of living of almost everyone around the world. If you watched any of it and you were all busy, I'm sure you didn't have much time. That's what virtually every nation said, even the ones that aren't doing their fair share. The investments I proposed tonight also advance the foreign policy, in my view, that benefits the middle class. That means making sure every nation plays by the same rules in the global economy, including China. In my discussion with President Xi, I told him, we welcome the competition. We're not looking for conflict. But I made absolutely clear that we will defend America's interest across the board. America will stand up to unfair trade practices that undercut American workers and American industries, like subsidies from state to state-owned operations and enterprises, and the theft of American technology and intellectual property. I also told President Xi that we'll maintain a strong military presence in the Indo-Pacific, just as we do with NATO and Europe, not to start a conflict, but to prevent one. I told them what I've said to many world leaders, that America will not back away from our commitments, our commitment to human rights and fundamental freedoms and to our alliances. And I pointed out to him, no responsible American president could remain silent when basic human rights are being so blatantly violated. An American president has to represent the essence of what our country stands for. America is an idea, the most unique idea in history. We are created, all of us, equal. It's who we are. And we cannot walk away from that principle and, in fact, say we're dealing with the American idea. With regard to Russia, I know it concerns some of you, but I made very clear to Putin that we're not going to seek escalation, but their actions will have consequences if they turn out to be true, and they turned out to be true. So I responded directly and proportionately to Russia's interference in our elections and the cyber attacks on our government and our business. They did both of these things, and I told them we would respond, and we have. But we can also cooperate when it's our mutual interest. We did it when we extended the New START Treaty on nuclear arms, and we're working to do it on climate change. But he understands we will respond. On Iran and North Korea, nuclear programs that present serious threats to American security and the security of the world. We're going to be working closely with our allies to address the threats posed by both of these countries through diplomacy as well as stern deterrence. And American leadership means ending the forever war in Afghanistan. We have without hyperbole, the greatest fighting force in the history of the world. I'm the first president in 40 years who knows what it means to have a son serving in a war zone. Today, we have service members serving in the same war zone as their parents did. We have service members in Afghanistan who were not yet born on 9/11. The war in Afghanistan, as we remember the debates here, were never meant to be multi-generational undertakings of nation building. We went to Afghanistan to get the terrorists who attacked us on 9/11. And we said we would follow Osama bin Laden to the gates of hell to do it. If you've been in the upper Konar Valley, you've kind of seen the gates of hell. And we delivered justice to bin Laden. We degraded the terrorist threat of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. And after 20 years of valor, and sacrifice, it's time to bring those troops home. Look, even as we do, we'll maintain over-the-horizon capacity to suppress future threats to the homeland. And make no mistake, in 20 years, terrorism has metastasized. The threat has evolved way beyond Afghanistan. Those of you in the intelligence committees, the foreign relations committee, defense committees, you know well, we have to remain vigilant against the threats to the United States wherever they come from. Al-Qaeda and ISIS are in Yemen, Syria, Somalia, other places in Africa, in the Middle East, and beyond. And we won't ignore what our intelligence agencies have determined to be the most lethal terrorist threat to the homeland today. White supremacy is terrorism. We're not going to ignore that either. My fellow Americans, look, we have to come together to heal the soul of this nation. It was nearly a year ago before her father's funeral when I spoke with Gianna Floyd, George Floyd's young daughter. She's a little tyke, so I was kneeling down to talk to her so I could look her in the eye. She looked at me, she said, "My daddy changed the world." Well, after the conviction of George Floyd's murderer, we can see how right she was if we have the courage to act as a Congress. We've all seen the knee of injustice on the neck of Black Americans. Now's our opportunity to make some real progress. The vast majority of men and women wearing a uniform and a badge serve our communities, and they serve them honorably. I know them. I know they want. I know they want to help meet this moment as well. My fellow Americans, we have to come together to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the people they serve, to root out systemic racism in our criminal justice system, and to enact police reform in George Floyd's name that passed the House already. I know Republicans have their own ideas and are engaged in very productive discussions with Democrats in the Senate. We need to work together to find a consensus. But let's get it done next month, by the first anniversary of George Floyd's death. The country supports this reform, and Congress should act. We have a giant opportunity to bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice, real justice. And with the plans outlined tonight, we have a real chance to root out systemic racism that plagues America and American lives in other ways. A chance to deliver real equity, good jobs, good schools, affordable housing, clean air, clean water, being able to generate wealth and pass it down through generations because you have access to purchase a house. Real opportunities in the lives of more Americans, Black, white, Latino, Asian Americans, Native Americans. Look, I also want to thank the United States Senate for voting 94-1 to pass the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act to protect Asian American and Pacific Islanders. You acted decisively. You can see on television the viciousness of the hate crimes. we've seen over this past year and for too long. I urge the House to do the same and send that legislation to my desk, which I will gladly, anxiously sign. I also hope Congress will get to my desk the Equality Act to protect LGBTQ Americans. For all transgender Americans watching at home, especially young people, you're so brave. I want you to know your president has your back. Another thing, let's authorize the Violence Against Women Act, which has been law for 27 years. "27 years ago, I wrote it. It'll close the act that has to be authorized now, will close the boyfriend loophole to keep guns out of the hands of abusers. The court order said this is an abuser. You can't own a gun. It's to close that loophole that existed. You know, it's estimated that 50 women are shot and killed by an intimate partner every month in America. 50 a month. Let's pass it and save some lives. And I need not tell anyone this, but gun violence has become an epidemic in America. The flag at the White House was still flying at half-mast for the 8 victims of the mass shooting in Georgia, when 10 more lives were taken in a mass shooting in Colorado. And in the week in between those two events, 250 other Americans were shot dead in the streets of America. 250 shot dead. I know how hard it is to make progress on this issue. In the 90s, we passed universal background checks, a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines that hold 100 rounds that can be fired off in seconds. We beat the NRA. Mass shootings and gun violence declined. Check out the report over 10 years. But in the early 2000s, the law expired. We've seen daily bloodshed since. I'm not saying if the law continued, we wouldn't see bloodshed. More than 2 weeks ago in the Rose Garden, surrounded by some of the bravest people I know, the survivors and families who lost loved ones to gun violence, I laid out several of the Department of Justice actions that are being taken to impact on this epidemic. One of them is banning so-called ghost guns. These are homemade guns built from a kit that includes directions how to finish the firearm. The parts have no serial numbers, so they show up at crime scenes and they can't be traced. The buyers of these ghost gun kits aren't required to pass any background check. Anyone, from a criminal or terrorist, could buy this kit and within 30 minutes have a weapon that's lethal. But no more. And I'll do everything in my power to protect the American people from this epidemic of gun violence, but it's time for Congress to act as well. Look, I don't want to become confrontational, but we need more Senate Republicans to join the overwhelming majority of Democratic colleagues and close the loopholes required in background check purchases of guns. We need a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. And don't tell me it can't be done. We did it before and it worked. Talk to most responsible gun owners and hunters. They'll tell you there's no possible justification for having 100 rounds in a weapon. What do you think, deer are wearing Kevlar vests? I mean, they'll tell you that there are too many people today who are able to buy a gun but shouldn't be able to buy a gun. These kinds of reasonable reforms have overwhelming support from the American people, including many gun owners. The country supports reform, and Congress should act. This shouldn't be a red or blue issue. And no amendment to the Constitution is absolute. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. From the very beginning, there were certain guns, weapons, that could not be owned by Americans. Certain people could not own those weapons ever. We're not changing the Constitution. We're being reasonable. I think this is not a Democrat or Republican issue. I think it's an American issue. And here's what else we can do. Immigration has always been essential to America. Let's end our exhausting war over immigration. For more than 30 years, politicians have talked about immigration reform, and we've done nothing about it. It's time to fix it. On day one of my presidency, I kept my commitment and sent a comprehensive immigration bill to the United States Congress. If you believe we need to secure the border, pass it, because it has a lot of money for high-tech border security. If you believe in a pathway to citizenship, pass it. There's over 11 million undocumented folks, the vast majority of here overstaying visas. Pass it. We can actually, if you actually want to solve a problem, I've sent a bill to take a close look at it. We also have to get at the root problem of why people are fleeing, particularly to our southern border from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. The violence, the corruption, the gangs, the political instability, hunger, hurricanes, earthquakes, natural disasters. When I was president, when I was vice president, the president asked me to focus on providing help needed to address the root causes of migration. And it helped keep people in their own countries instead of being forced to leave. The plan was working, but the last administration decided it was not worth it. I'm restoring the program and asked Vice President Harris to lead our diplomatic effort to take care of this. I have absolute confidence she'll get the job done. Now look, if you don't like my plan, let's at least pass what we all agree on. Congress needs to pass legislation this year to finally secure protection for dreamers. The young people who've only known America as their home. And permanent protection for immigrants who are here on temporary protective status who came from countries beset by man-made and natural-made violence and disaster. As well as a pathway to citizenship for foreign workers who put food on our tables. Look, immigrants have done so much for America during this pandemic and throughout our history. The country supports immigration reform. We should act. Let's argue over it. Let's debate it. But let's act. And if we truly want to restore the soul of America, we need to protect the sacred right to vote. Most people more people voted in the last presidential election than any time in American history, in the middle of the worst pandemic ever. It should be celebrated. Instead, it's being attacked. Congress should pass H.R. 1 and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and send it to my desk right away. The country supports it, and Congress should act now. Look, in conclusion, as we gather here tonight, the image of a violent mob assaulting this Capitol, desecrating our democracy, remain vivid in all our minds. Lives were put at risk, many of your lives. Lives were lost. Extraordinary courage was summoned. The insurrection was an existential crisis, a test of whether our democracy could survive, and it did. But the struggle is far from over. The question of whether our democracy will long endure is both ancient and urgent. As old as our republic, still vital today. Can our democracy deliver on its promise that all of us, created equal in the image of God, had a chance to lead lives of dignity, respect, and possibility? Can our democracy deliver to the most pressing needs of our people? Can our democracy overcome the lies, anger, hate, and fears that have pulled us apart? America's adversaries, the autocrats of the world, are betting we can't. And I promise you, they're betting we can't. They believe we're too full of anger and division and rage. They look at the images of the mob that assaulted the Capitol as proof that the sun is setting on American democracy. But they're wrong. You know it, I know it. But we have to prove them wrong. We have to prove democracy still works, that our government still works, and we can deliver for our people. In our first 100 days together, we've acted to restore people's faith in democracy to deliver. We're vaccinating the nation. We're creating hundreds of thousands of new jobs. We're delivering real results to people. They can see it, feel it in their own lives. Opening doors of opportunity, guaranteeing some more fairness and justice. That's the essence of America. That's democracy in action. Our Constitution opens with the words, as trite as it sounds, we the people. Well, it's time to remember that we the people are the government. You and I. Not some force in a distant capital. Not some powerful force that we have no control over. It's us. It's we the people. In another era, when our democracy was tested, Franklin Roosevelt reminded us, in America, we do our part. We all do our part. That's all I'm asking. That we do our part, all of us. That if we do that, we will meet the center challenge of the age by proving that democracy is durable and strong. Autocrats will not win the future. We will. America will. And the future belongs to America. As I stand here tonight before you in a new and vital hour of life and democracy of our nation, and I can say with absolute confidence, I have never been more confident or optimistic about America. Not because I'm president, because of what's happening with the American people. We've stared into the abyss of insurrection and autocracy, pandemic and pain, and we, the people, did not flinch. At the very moment our adversaries were certain we'd pull apart and fail, we came together, we united. With light and hope, we summoned a new strength, new resolve to position us to win the competition of the 21st century. On our way to a union more perfect, more prosperous, and more just, as one people, one nation, and one America. Folks, as I told every world leader I've ever met with over the years, it's never, ever, ever been a good bet to bet against America, and it still isn't. We're the United States of America. There's not a single thing, nothing beyond our capacity. We can do whatever we set our minds to if we do it together. So let's begin to get together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you for your patience. Thank you. Thank you.
Big day for complete sentences. I'd say that's the real winner tonight. The return of grammar. So a bunch of stuff that I want to touch on, just to give a brief breakdown of what we saw. Again, that was the end of the first address to a joint session of Congress. Now, a few things I want to touch on. First of all, I think the most striking thing out of this entire speech was, well, there's two things, first of all. There was a point where Biden said, we're on track to cut child poverty in half this year. And they did a crowd shot, and the shot showed every Democrat standing up applauding and every Republican sitting down, not applauding. For child poverty, if your allegiance is so strongly to your partisan side of the aisle that you can't manage to stand up or even just sit down and applaud cutting child poverty in half in the United States, then you've lost the plot. You've lost the plot. There was another point, too, that I thought was especially striking, and these were the two moments that stood out the most for me. And that was that Biden took a moment to thank Mitch McConnell for naming the cancer bill after his son, Beau, who died of cancer. And just knowing that Mitch McConnell is going to turn around and do everything humanly possible to make sure that Biden doesn't succeed, to make sure to obstruct his agenda, to make sure that he fails. And that's how you know right there that the two parties aren't the same. Because on one side, you have this guy, and that was an ad-lib moment, by the way. He even said a point of personal privilege. That was an ad-lib moment. It wasn't in a speech. Took a moment to thank Mitch McConnell, of all people, likely the one person who's done more damage to American democracy than any other figure in our lifetimes. He took a moment to thank him. And Mitch McConnell is going to turn around and obstruct every facet of his agenda. Two parties aren't the same. Now, what I think is especially, I mean, here's the thing. Right before we began Biden's speech, I went over a bunch of the Fox News scandals of the day. You know, the fake story about Kamala Harris having her book handed out to every migrant at the border. The fake story about Joe Biden cutting red meat consumption to 4 pounds a year. When you wonder why they need to take these major swings on these completely bogus stories, it's because if they were to actually oppose what the White House and the Democratic Party more broadly are trying to do, they would fall on their faces. Look at the things that Joe Biden has touted in the speech. Vaccine success, fixing infrastructure, lowering drug costs. And I know that that's been a Democratic and Republican thing for years, but fingers crossed it happens. Equal pay for women, lowering healthcare costs, supporting public education, and making it free for 4 years, making community college free for 2 years, buying American, advancing into the 21st century and combating climate change with a focus on jobs, clean water, and eliminating lead pipes, passing the Equality Act, passing the Violence Against Women Act, gun reform, even on the simplest topics, like just quite simply expanding background checks, strengthening unions so that we can expand and protect the middle class, comprehensive immigration reform, which is popular across the political spectrum, that's granting citizenship to dreamers, and passing the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and bolstering our democracy that way. There is a reason that Republicans have to make up stories about hamburgers, because what in there is a popular position to stake their futures on? Opposing public education? Opposing jobs? Opposing clean water? Opposing unions? Opposing DACA? All of these things enjoy the vast, vast majority of support from the American people. All of these things. Infrastructure, vaccine success, equal pay for women, lowering healthcare costs, lowering drug prices, immigration reform. And that's not even to say specifically within immigration reform what to do. It's to reform immigration, something that both parties have been wailing about. The Republicans right now are on a 24-hour news cycle crying about Biden's border crisis. He's inviting them right now. Send him a bill on immigration reform. They won't, because as soon as they do, as soon as it's solved, they won't have anything to scream about. The whole point isn't actually solving things. It's finding something to stake your position on. They don't want solutions, because then that takes away their talking points. And so mark my words, you will not have a single Republican or maybe beyond the Mitt Romneys and Susan Collins of the parties, but you're not going to have some vast bipartisan support for immigration reform, even though those are the people who actually want immigration reform. Because once you give them immigration reform, then they can't use it to fearmonger against Democrats. What have you seen before every single election in September, October? Migrant caravans pouring into the border. There is a reason for that. They don't want to fix it because then they can't use it as a cudgel against Democrats. It's their weapon. But all of that is to say, all of what Biden brought up, he didn't bring up any wildly extremist positions. These are basic things. 70, 80, 90% even in some aspects. We're talking about the Background Checks Act has the support of 90% of Americans. Universal background checks.
Needed, so I don't know how to reach out to you, but I have the experience. My name is Troy Nails. I'm the sheriff in Fort County, and it's honored to be a part of that.
I don't want to hurt your reputation. Everything on you. Obviously, I'm Democrat, the sheriff.
I'm not a sheriff. I'm just a guy. I can do a whole lot of good in that conversation.
Sheriff.
All right. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, Mr. President, thanks for what you said about that.
Nice to get these like hot mic moments. I think another big thing that I noticed within this speech was a lot of times, especially when speaking about the pandemic and the success of vaccines in this country, Biden spent all of that time crediting you, the American people, for working to defeat the virus. It was all thanks to you, thanks to Americans, thanks to everybody out there, thanks for your sacrifices. It was all of the credit was heaped upon everyone else. Whereas, of course, in the last one of these speeches that we saw, Trump would credit himself. And he would credit himself while at the same time flouting his own guidelines that he set forth, taking his mask off.
Session of the two houses now dissolved.
I guess that's the difference between having somebody like Joe Biden and a malignant narcissist in office. One thing I do want to talk about before I end is I think one of the most important points here, and that is how to pay for it. So I've already gone over a lot of what he covered in terms of what he wants to get done in his agenda. So the issue becomes, and Republicans aren't going to push back against that, because what are you going to push back against? You're going to push back against. I think this is just, nothing important. You're not going to be able to push back against like roads, bridges, airports, eliminating lead pipes, renewing the electric grid, expanding broadband access for rural Americans. You're not going to be able to push back against any of those things. So what Republicans are going to need to do is push back against the ways to pay for it. That's going to be their only. The only thing they can talk about from here is they can't attack it on the actual merits of the plans within the American Jobs Plan or the American Families Plan either. So what they're going to do is claim, okay, well, we don't buy into how we're actually going to pay for it. And so I just want to be clear here. There are a few ways that I think are especially important in terms of focusing on how to pay for it. And that is, first, the personal income tax rate is going to be increased to 39.6%. And I know Axios posted an article not too long ago where they called it an eye-popping number. So that we're clear about 39.6%. That was the rate until just a few years ago. It was also the rate for most of the 90s, and it was also the rate from about 1932 until 1986. So for most of the 20th century, the highest marginal tax rate in this country was 39.6%, and that is for the highest earners. So when you have Republicans falling over themselves to attack this marginal tax rate, remember who they're doing it in support of. And finally, another big way is actually funding the IRS, and so Republicans are going to push back against that as well. But I think what's important to remember about funding the IRS is I think if you invest something like for every I think they're trying to invest $80 to $100 billion into the IRS, and that would bring in like 800. No, I think it was maybe opposite. Maybe they're investing 80 million into the IRS, and that would bring in like 800 million. So basically, the IRS was gutted because it was the government was run by somebody who had a personal vendetta against the IRS and Donald Trump because he was supposedly being audited in perpetuity. And so if we just invest a little bit of money into the IRS, then we can actually see something like tenfold gains from it. And these are from people that are just, cheating on their taxes, basically. Another thing is to raise the capital gains tax. And again, this would only impact people making over $1 million a year. So even Jim Jordan came out and tweeted during this speech and said, here we go, pull up the tweet. Get ready, America. President Biden is going to raise your taxes. And by virtue of saying that, he is literally just tweeting for millionaires. Biden's been clear since day one, since the campaign. Taxes won't go up unless you're making $400,000 or more. So when Republicans go to bat and fall over themselves to claim that taxes are being raised, it is clear they are broadcasting who their audience is. It's, whether they're doing it inadvertently or not, they're telling on themselves, and they're showing that this is who their audience actually is. When you complain about your taxes being raised and the only people for whom taxes are being raised are those making $500,000 basically, well, then that means you're only speaking to the top 1% of Americans, basically. So just what I thought were some especially important points. Obviously the agenda is popular. There's nothing radical. There's nothing extreme. There's things that are absolutely necessary, from, revamping our infrastructure to lowering healthcare costs to making, drinking water safe for all Americans, passing the Equality Act, passing the Violence Against Women Act, common sense gun reforms, which again are supported by 90% of Americans, strengthening unions so that we can protect and bolster the middle class, comprehensive immigration reform, which both sides are clamoring to have. So do it. Now you actually have an opportunity to do it instead of just whining about the hashtag Biden border crisis, and passing the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and H.R. 1, both of which are, if you've watched any of my videos, listened to any of my podcasts, watched my interviews, that is the number one most important issue. Because you can have your issue, and it can be anything from climate change to women's reproductive rights to infrastructure to the John Lewis Voting Rights Act to the Union Act to the Justice and Policing Act, whatever it is, unless we take care of our electoral system, unless we take care of the integrity of our elections first, unless we bolster our economy our electoral system first, the security of our electoral system first, none of that's going to matter, because Democrats will basically be legislated out of government. States will be gerrymandered. Districts will be redrawn. People will be blocked from voting. Drop boxes will be eliminated. Early voting hours that overwhelmingly favor, minorities who tend to vote for Democrats will be shortened. Whatever Republicans can do to push Democratic voters out of the political process or pack them into districts so that they have as little representation as possible, they will do. So unless we're able to pass the For the People Act to undo some of these changes, these attacks on democracy itself, then we can have all of the pipe dreams in the world, we can have all the hopes in the world to pass all of your political priorities, but it's not going to matter. It's not going to matter after 2022 if we lose the House, because we were gerrymandered out of it. So the number one most important thing, reform the filibuster and pass H.R. 1, pass S1, pass the For the People Act. It's all the same bill. H.R. 1, S1, For the People Act. That is our number one priority. I will harp on this from now until, hopefully I don't have to harp on it after 2022, but harp on it every day if I need to, because it is far and away the most important issue. So with that said, I would just ask real quick, if you enjoyed the live stream, the best way to support me is to subscribe to my channel. I don't do memberships or anything like that, so I would just ask if you want to see one to two videos a day talking about the top trending stories or events like these, or I do interviews every week with people like I've interviewed Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, Karen Bass. I interviewed just last week the Congresswoman from Washington, D.C., Eleanor Holmes Norton. I have Pete Buttigieg coming up again this upcoming week. I also do my video podcast on here as well. So if you want to see any of that, the only way to support me, the best way to support me is by subscribing to my channel. So with that said, thank you so much for tuning in. I know there are a lot of places you can watch this, so I appreciate you watching here with me, and we'll talk soon.